Yo, 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 welcome back to another episode of the Minivan Movie Club. I am joined by the one and only bearded boy wonder,
Nick Wiggum. You know, it was recently...
I wanted to say your name.
Oh, well,
Nick Wiggum.
It was recently pointed out to me that you've given me the moniker of Robin, the boy wonder.
Well, I just think of it as the bearded boy
I
wonder.
know. And they were like,
boy
why does Brett keep referring to you as Robin? He's like, are you the Robin of the show?
No.
Like,
I am definitely more the Grayson. I'm the Gray son.
Okay.
I
thought you were talking about the dick part.
No, both. Honestly, I am both the boy child. I just think of you as the beard. Like if there's the eighth wonder of the world, it's not the Astrodome anymore. It's more so your beard. And you have trimmed it quite a bit since I met you. But when I first met you, it was like almost Duck Dynasty level beard.
Yep.
But like you've always had it well maintained, very thick, girthy beard.
You know, one of those things where when you roll around in bed and you like pull your own beard because it gets stuck under your arm, that's when you know it's time to like cut back on
I don't have that problem. I can barely grow any kind of facial hair. It's always been patchy. I like the line from Joe Dirt, it just grows in all white trash. You like that?
Yeah, there you go.
But I have been able to grow from time to time like a good mustache, so I tend to keep that. Every once in a while, I'm sure you deal with this, where I'm like, I want to cut this all off.
Oh, yeah.
I just want it all to go away. So I trim it back. But I haven't been like clean, naked shaven since before I got married. I've always had at least a mustache.
I did during the COVID times.
The COVID
times, just because of work purposes.
Yep.
But
and during COVID, lots of people watched lots of movies, and here we are, post-COVID, because COVID's over somewhere, I hope. So instead of talking about COVID today, we're going to talk about what is arguably the greatest superhero franchise movie of all time. And I'm not talking about Marvel or the MCU. I'm not talking about Iron Man, which we have spent plenty of time talking about. Nay, I am talking about Spider-Man.
Spider-Man.
And as you all know, if you've paid attention to movies, Across the Spiderverse, the latest installment to the Spider-Man saga, is set to come out literally on the day that we'll be publishing this episode. But there have been 9 Spider-Man movies made since 2002. That's literally a new Spider-Man movie every other year. And that's pretty incredible. Whether they've been good, whether they've been bad, we're here to talk about that. What we wanted to do is kind of talk a little bit about who Spider-Man is as a character, prep you over those 9 films, and get ready for the newest one. So I'm curious, Nick, did you watch the 9 movies?
I watched the 9.
What did you think? Were there any things that kind of like you took away just before we break them down one by one?
Yeah, there's a few things about the character that I think continually resonate, and it's why if you look at like probably 2 of the most successful runs of superheroes that we have across cinema are going to be like overall catalog is probably Spider-Man and Batman.
Yeah.
And as you pointed out to me earlier, there's several similarities, but there's a reason that I think people can really identify with those characters, and I think it's the realism of their struggles and the clear portrayal of their villains as villains. I think that the good versus bad clearly being laid out makes for an enjoyable watch because you get to see Spider-Man overcome evil, and I think that delivers on a storyline that really helps propel all 9 of those films forward.
I was really shocked at the level of similarities between Batman and Spider-Man. Obviously, their monikers are a little bit similar of Animal Man, but also when I think of Batman, I think of the billionaire playboy Bruce Wayne, and then when I think of Spider-Man, I think of the kind of high school kid Peter Parker. So those 2 personas are so different. But when you think about the masked vigilante coming from a broken home, struggling with their force in the city, and New York and Gotham kind of playing its own character in the movies, in the video games, in the comics, there's so much lore between them. Their villains are iconic. Even some of their villains are a little bit similar. So I thought it was a really fun marathon. I think when you think about summer, there is something fun about the summer blockbusters, but there's also something fun about going to the movie theater or sitting at the house and having a list of movies to watch. And the Spider-Man movie marathon, it's a good marathon. It's 9 movies. You've got 9 days if you want to do it. You can do it through a whole weekend if you want to do a binging marathon. And there's so many different ways to see the character because you get to see the origins, you get to see new villains, different interpretations of not just Spider-Man and Peter Parker, but the family and the cast of characters around them. So I thought it was a really fun movie marathon. I'm excited to hear us give our flowers to the movies.
Yeah, there's definitely some roses that are due, a lot more roses that are due, I think, than thorns.
Yep.
But there's a couple clunkers that were delivered throughout the 9, but several of them are super rewatchable movies that, like, you can dive into any of them at any time. Everybody's probably got their favorite. We know we have our individual favorite, maybe Spider-Man, and then our individual favorite, maybe Tobey, and our favorite Uncle Ben or Aunt May or all those things. And so the whole universe, the way that they've set it all up, it lends itself to being a film that you can return back to. And one of the biggest categories for us when we're rating a film is, what is that rewatchability? Do you want to put the movie back in a week later after you watched it, a month later, annually? Like, hey, I'm going to watch this movie every year. I know that it's just kind of got that level of enjoyment for me. And I think the Spider-Man movies for so many people are up there in that type of rewatchability category.
Yep. So for me, here's how we're going to do this today. We're not going to spend our whole time here just breaking down the episodes or the individual movies one by one. We're going to give them their flowers. So we're going to talk about the roses, which are the good things we liked about these movies, and then the thorns. Kind of go through those 9 movies. Then from there, we've got some discussion questions to kind of talk a little bit about what we learned or what we really felt from those movies. Then we'll do our rankings and our grades before we kind of land the episode. So let's get started. What were your first roses for the 2002 Sam Raimi Spider-Man?
2002, take me back to the simpler times. So for me personally, my birthday's in May. I've always enjoyed that I get to go see like a really fun superhero movie around my birthday, and one of the biggest first memories I have is going to see 2002's Spider-Man movie and just being like blown away as a kid. Rewatching it again, I've seen it so many times, but rewatching it again this last week, it's still just so fun. Like, it is an origin story that has completely bled into my brain in the way that I view all superhero origin stories. I think I texted you that. Like, the way that they set up his struggle when he's doing his training montage, I think that is something that really pays off once he becomes skilled, because you've seen him go through that struggle, and it makes it super relatable for everybody. Even though he's got powers, he still has to work hard to use those correctly. What about you?
So I really like Spider-Man. I was 11 years old when this movie came out, and I remember it being, hey, you got to see it. You got to see it. It's super cool. It's super interesting. And I think you are not truly giving flowers to Spider-Man as a character. If you don't acknowledge the Joker with the Batman, then you can't acknowledge Spider-Man without the Green Goblin.
Yep.
And William Dafoe is just, he's a bigger actor than this movie is, really. Like, there's no reason why an actor of his gravitas, caliber, his specific acting acumen should be in this role, but he has such a fun time with it, and it works. I've got some different thorns with the movie in particular, but if I'm acknowledging the rose, to me, this is a movie that's all about casting the perfect person and just letting them get deep into the character. It's not as dark as like a Joker is in The Dark Knight or some other interpretations of characters, but it's so good. It's so believable. It's scary at times. It's haunting, and it just is perfect. You know, it's very conventional to say like it slaps, but it's a character that sticks with you. And when you think about all of the MCU, all of the DC movies, all the movies after this in those like 2000 to 2010 movies with like Hancock or The Punisher, a lot of movies that are based off of comic book movies but really weren't built to be in some sort of universe, the Green Goblin still stands out.
Yeah. He's iconic.
William Dafoe as Green Goblin is a character I'm like, yeah, sign me up for that movie, because any movie that William Dafoe is in, it's a great character, but in Spider-Man, just phenomenal.
Yeah, that bleeds into my second bout of rose petals here, is that it's very clear the portrayal of good and evil. The lines are clearly defined for Peter and for Green Goblin, and the way that they juxtapose each other, even their different color schemes, the way that those are used throughout the filming, and the way that Sam Raimi he makes it so eerie every time the Green Goblin, like Sam Raimi was the perfect director for the Green Goblin to be the villain, because he does such a good job of like making Norman seem like kind of creepy, with the way that he delivers lines, as far as the way the camera pans, and then the way the Green Goblin, when he shows up on screen, or the way he pops out, it's just so awesome to see still.
I think that you talk about the use of color in this rewatch. I didn't realize how masterfully used the color green was. There's so much foreshadowing. Like when you go into the Osborn mansion, all the walls are green. And so but then even later on, you go into Harry's apartment and like the decor is green. Mm-hmm. He's wearing a green button-up shirt. The school colors at the high school are green. The graduation caps are green. The gowns are green. The pillows, the balloons are green. And then when you go to Harry's apartment, like the pillows on his chair are green. The leather chairs that he has at the dining room, those are green. He's wearing a green tie. And as the movie goes on, Harry starts like slowly wearing more green to where he's eventually in the house. And it was like such a masterfully done thing where the costume and the set design speaks to what's foreshadowing in the second and third movies. To where I was like, I picked that up because I know what's going to happen with Harry's character. But it's kind of like primed in my mind, that very subliminal messaging, subconscious, that someone like Sam Raimi would do. And today we're used to breaking down movies and like seeing all the Easter eggs and going to New Rock Stars or going to Screen Crush, going to heavy spoilers, whatever YouTube channel you subscribe to, looking for what does the license plate say. This is before anyone was doing that. And it's really cool to see that kind of...
Yeah, that's back when it would be like, this movie has 15 Easter eggs, and you'd be like, oh my God, like how did they get 15 things from pop culture in there? And the one cool thing that I just kind of want to point out real quick is that the Thanksgiving scene, Norman and Peter's outfits, the suits that they're wearing are the opposite colors. So Peter's wearing a green suit at the Thanksgiving dinner, and Norman's in like a blue suit with a red tie.
That's cool.
So it's kind of a cool like juxtapose of them changing that scene.
What about Thorn? Do you have any Thorns?
So I don't have a lot. I just know that I remember then, and it gets pointed out in No Way Home, but shooting the webs from his skin, I thought it was a weird choice then. We had the Spider-Man cartoon growing up.
I had no issues with it.
New web cartridges. It's not like a big deal, but it just always kind of like bugged me.
I was fine with it. I'm not as huge like I love Spider-Man as a character, but I honestly grew up watching the animated series, but I wasn't I'm much more in the Batman camp than I am Spider-Man. But I have a best friend that I grew up with, I went to high school with, Ray Roberts. Shout out to Ray. He's a huge Spider-Man fan. He's a huge Venom fan, more so Venom than Spider-Man. But he really got me into my love for the comic books, and so I can appreciate a lot more of who Spider-Man is because of the comic books. And like Batman, we talked about this earlier, there's so many versions of Spider-Man in the comic book, so many series runs where something as simple as that doesn't really get me. Whereas like in this movie specifically, a thorn that I had, I thought there was a lot of like really cheesy dialogue, especially in between Peter and MJ, like low-key stalker creepy, like what the stuff, where she's talking to Peter of like, has Spider-Man ever said anything about me? And he's like, yeah, I just told him that, like, if you look into somebody's eyes and you feel safe but strong and scared. And she's like, oh, you said that? Oh, my God. That's so cute. And I'm like, if somebody says that to me, you're a stalker. Stay away from me.
Me out.
Get away. Like, I know Sam Raimi helped write some of this movie. Like, I wonder, is that a joke? Does somebody know, is that a joke? Like, was he making fun of that? Or did they think, like, that is so romantic?
Well, I've seen some things that say, like, Sam Raimi is the master of awkward, so he knows that he's, like, doing these awkward situations. But part of me is like, yeah, but it still just makes, like, I don't know that that's a thing you want to elicit in your audience in this style of movie.
It just, especially in this moment of the movie, there's so many times where MJ is supposed to be the emotional crutch. Like, she's Princess Peach. We have to save her. We as the audience need to feel for this relationship between MJ and Peter. And there's so many times where I'm just like, this is awkward. So that felt like a big thorn for me.
Yeah, that leads into my second thorn for this film, which is I don't like the MJ casting.
Yeah.
I never liked the MJ casting. Kirsten Dunst is a fine actress. I don't think anything really bad about her personally.
Part of that, I think, is a little bit of writing, but I also agree that part of it's also the acting.
It never works for me.
I was painfully aware of this, and part of this is just because like I watched this whole movie marathon with my wife. She was like, so they're clearly trying to tell you that Kirsten Dunst has boobs, because in every movie of this series, they're like very quickly like, hey, put her in a shirt, get her wet.
Hey, like let's rain it.
It's really emphasis to make sure that like we know that Mary Jane Watson is a female with breasts. And I was like, okay, and it's a very like moot point now where there was a very like hypersexualization then that maybe isn't as acceptable now.
Well, it's like Friends, you know, if you like watch some of those old episodes, it's like, okay, I guess nobody in Friends has a bra, so like that's what we're doing now. And I pointed this out to you earlier. I don't know if it's like Sam Raimi had like a little crush on Kirsten Dunst, and so he's like, she's perfect for MJ, but it just, you know, it wasn't happening for me.
Yeah, but for me, that's those are my only like real thorns. All in all, I thought it was a good movie.
Oh,
I enjoyed it.
It's a fun movie. Still,
give me your roses for Spider-Man 2.
Spider-Man 2. So one of the biggest things we've talked about in sequels is the director. When you're setting up things, do you deliver on those story pieces? Do you deliver on the things that you foreshadowed? Spider-Man 2 does such a great job of delivering on its story beats from the first one with their characters, progressing them into the next steps that are logical for the problems that they would have. The IE of this would be Peter Parker. The first movie, he's kind of discovering who am I? With great power comes great responsibility. Well, now we've moved into, okay, I know I'm Spider-Man, and I'm working at that, but like, how do I make this work and also be Peter Parker?
Mm-hmm.
And so just the way that they delivered on character growth, I just thought was like super fitting, and it made for such a fun watch and payoff watching those back to back. Whereas as a kid, I would have watched the first one, and then I probably didn't watch it right before I saw the second one. You know, was it 3 years later? So I really appreciated that. Yeah. What about you?
So there's a lot to love about this movie. I'm going to say a pretty big statement as it relates to other comic book movies. If Iron Man was the blueprint for the MCU's formula, then this movie was the prototype for building a cinematic universe. Because the first Spider-Man was fine. It was a good movie. It tells a complete story. This movie really digs into a lot of deep issues while still being fun and accessible. I think that Edward Molina as Otto Octavius is a fantastic villain who really shows a lot of depth. Instead of just being evil for the sake of being evil, or you see a lot of great villains like the Joker or the Green Goblin where it takes a special performance of being someone really crazy. Otto is a very different type of villain, and Edward Molina plays it with such grace and control. It's not just, a lot of times people think that volume equals intensity, so if you yell or you're angry, that makes you angry, or that makes you this evil. It's really, really good. And so when you think about that movie being the blueprint, the very like opening sequences, the pacing is so good. Like from the moment it gets started, we don't start off with some, monologue like the first and the second movie. It just goes. And I can't remember like the pacing all the way to the point where Otto becomes Doc Ock. I never thought to myself, I need to get to this. We get reintroduced to all the characters. We're back in the world, and it just immerses. And so huge props to Sam Raimi because the pacing and opening sequences are so good. It's perfect. I wouldn't change anything about the first 30 minutes of the movie. Nothing. It's flawless. It's perfect.
Yeah, I mean, it's often regarded as one of the best movie sequels, not superhero sequels, movie sequels of all time. Like, it's up there. T2, The Dark Knight, like Spider-Man 2 still rings. The Godfather Part 2. Like, when people list the top sequels ever, there's a reason that Sam clearly had a vision when he was making this movie, putting it together, and the cast just does it phenomenally. My second is going to have to be the action set pieces are just so much fun. The train scene, the way that plays out, the emotions that they bring. They do such a good job with Spider-Man of like bringing all of New York kind of into it with the way that they when they pan out and get like little snippets of them talking about Spider-Man, or like at the beginning whenever he drives in and then swings out with the pizzas, and the guy's like, hey, he stole his pizzas. It's just funny to see. And you see like all these like comedians now that like we know from like podcasts or different things kind of pop up.
I really wanted to do this, but we record a little bit later in the day for us, but I really wanted to like borrow, like, and we should get some pizza. And it's like, I was talking about this, eat some pizza, but I didn't want to just recreate that video you sent me of the pizza film school. I was like, their shtick is
talk about some
they're just doing podcasts with pizza now. But I love pizza and I love Spider-Man and I love this movie. Something that I also wanted to point out is, for me, the first movie really relies on William Dafoe as Green Goblin. Without him, I don't think that movie's as good. Lots of credit everywhere else. It's just it's a solid movie. There's nothing like overly wrong with it. But what really brings it into that like solid movie is just an amazing performance by William Dafoe. This movie, however, has excellent performances from everybody. I think that James Franco gives a really good performance as Harry Osborn, kind of in between these allegiances and not knowing what to feel. You have Edward Molina as Doc Ock, who's fantastic. But really, this movie relies, to me, on the emotional arc between Peter and Aunt May as Peter struggles to figure out, like, should I be Spider-Man? What does that look like? And there's this wonderful sequence of Peter's surprise party where Aunt May has, defaults on her mortgage. She's gifting him the money, and she's talking about how she's lost Uncle Ben and she's tired. That sequence was so perfectly beautiful of how the pacing was. And she's like, you're going to take this money. You will take this money. And where we've seen now with other iterations of Spider-Man and Aunt May, this Aunt May has been defeated but still believes in the goodness of loving and giving to other people. We don't necessarily see that as well pointed. And again, this is a classically trained actress. I think this Aunt May shows us the love despite all that she's been through. This movie needs it because later on, when he finally has that sit-down moment and tells her like how he feels guilty for Uncle Ben's death, there's so many payoff moments between Peter and Aunt May. I think this movie and the series does more for the Peter Parker and Aunt May relationship than any of the other series does. And this movie specifically shows like that arc, her guilt, his guilt, them coming to terms with that, and then her moving out of the house. And like she does everything without knowing he's actually Spider-Man. Like I kept thinking like, does she know?
Yeah.
Does she know? But she keeps giving him encouragement. And I just thought that this was perfect. You say a lot of times I made fun of you. Like, man, this movie has a lot of heart. But like, to me, Aunt May was the heart and soul of this movie. And it takes Peter saving her over and over and over again, but really she saves him in the end.
Yeah, there's so many like situations between them that like hit me in the feels. Whenever he tries to wake her up after the party and she's like, Ben? Mm-hmm. She's like, oh, I just thought your uncle was here for a second.
Yep.
And then after that, the whenever she's having the garage sale and she's like, yeah, he just needs his hero.
Yeah.
Like, he's just a kid.
Everyone needs some hope.
He needs somebody to look up to. And I was like, man, like, golly. There's a reason that movie remains so popular, and it's still some people's favorite superhero movie.
Side note, I don't know if this is like a rose that I would give it, but it's like, what a crazy good soundtrack. I was watching the credits, and like they have Dashboard Confessional, Vindicated. I remember they made the song Hero with Chad Kroeger from
I used to jam that
Nickelback,
so
and the dude from
Saliva.
was I can't think of his name.
Yeah, I used to listen to that.
some Josie. And then they have so many good songs on that soundtrack where they had Michael Bublé before he got really big. He did a cover of Spider-Man on that. Like, it's a banger soundtrack. So I was listening to it with my son. He loves Spider-Man. My son loves Spidey and the Amazing Friends. Like, I have all these Spider-Man toys because of him. Like, there is Spidey everywhere in this household because he still has this commercial appeal. But it's a banger. It's a great movie. The only thorn I have for it truly is I really don't like Kirsten Dunst, but you already mentioned that, so I'm not going to give it a thorn for that. And then just the fact that it ended. It ends, and it makes sense. The villain makes sense. It's not like he just dies, like, oh, all of a sudden he switched. So many times comic book movies struggle with the villain all of a sudden just changes their thought. Here it's like, oh, he finally gets consciousness again. The AI arms are no longer controlling him. He knows he only has a temporary amount of time, so let's do this now, and it's just perfect.
Yeah, I think it delivers on a theme that is pretty prevalent with all of Spider-Man's villains, which is like you get the setup of like even if you have good intentions, if you try to cut corners and not do things the right way, like this is what the chaos that it brings, right? So you have like Osborn, he's like, I'm gonna lose my company. I've got to do this, even though it's not ready for trial. And the same thing with Otto. He's trying to push, this technology, and Peter even warns him in the movie, like, hey, like, have you thought this all the way? He's like, no, I got it, my boy, I got this. And then,
and even like the rapport between Otto and Peter, even like his wife Rosalie,
when they're sitting down talking at that,
I was like,
table,
that matters. That ends up paying off at the very end. Like, masterful writing. It makes me think I want to see more from Sam Raimi because I'm not a huge like Evil Dead fan personally. I know they're cult classic films, and Bruce Campbell, who has some really fun moments, especially in 2 and 3. I love his role in 2 as a ticket guy. That's so funny to me. No, we're not coming in.
Yeah.
It's so perfect, so perfect. But really, for me, just the fact that it ends is really the only low note.
Yeah, I kind of force some thorns, but it's nothing that's like really worth mentioning.
Okay, so let's jump on to 3, the epic conclusion to Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. What are your roses?
So I've got one rose. I've got one rose for this, and I like that it shows you just like how messy it is to be Spider-Man, because it's one of those things that like we often idolize like celebrity and superhero, but just seeing like the chaos that it brings and realizing that like even if you find a way to make it work, like it's never going to be like a beautiful situation with relationships, just that messiness. And so I think that they execute that well, particularly in the first like 30-45 minutes, just the dynamics of like him and MJ and him and Harry still, and like their battle to start. I think that they kind of showcase that pretty well. So
a big rose for me. I think that the opening sequence, it's not the true opening sequence, but the first big fight scene between Harry Osborn and Peter Parker, and I say that as Harry because is he the new Goblin?
Yeah,
like,
I think that's what he's
I know
listed
that
as
they
new
were.
Goblin.
I remember there being toys sold, and it was like, so they didn't want it to be Green Goblin. They needed to create this thing, so there was toys for the new Goblin, which is a horrible name, by the way.
New Goblin.
I am the new Goblin. But that fight scene is awesome, and when you look at the time period that it was taken, it slaps. It's very cool. They're weaving in between buildings, and like he's given Spider-Man the business, and Spider-Man's flying around New York without his mask, without his suit. It was new and refreshing. So I'm like, okay, sweet, this is gonna be awesome. Then they cut to Marco Flynn, and throughout the story we learn that Marco Flynn is actually the person that killed Uncle Ben in the very first movie. So I'm like super invested in these villains. I think that Sam Raimi does a fantastic job of setting up those villains, and I just found that Marco Flynn was interesting because he's kind of this guy he's a bad guy, but like he's trying to do the right things for his daughter. He wants to. I relate as a father figure to these stories far more than I did as a teenager. If my daughter was sick, I would do whatever I need to do, and I think the message of like forgiveness is something that comes up constantly in comic book movies, and so the fulfillment on Peter Parker, it's something that started this journey that is really good. It makes so much sense, but for me, that's really where the roses stop, and this movie gets really thorny.
Yeah, it quickly descends into madness. I think everything that we see with Peter once he gets the symbiote suit, and then he's like dancing around, is just awful. It's cringy. It's not cool.
Cringy.
Like his interaction with the female actresses, his moves. The whole thing is just, it's hard to watch. It's not fun. I remember seeing him like when I was a kid in the cartoon and being like, no, he's cool. Like he gets super cool. Like, yes, he's too aggressive, and obviously it's like he's not a good Spider-Man anymore, like a good guy. But he like actually became cool. In this, it was just like not cool at all.
See, I felt like the scenes with symbiotic Peter, I don't know, symbiote Peter, were absolutely wild, and they're cringier than Topher Grace asking God to kill Peter Parker.
And I'm like, what are the chances he goes into the church? That Peter's in a bell.
He just looks up to God. God, will you kill Peter Parker? Like, Topher Grace is awkward in this movie. But when he looked, God, please kill Peter Parker, I was like, oh my God.
But I'm like, I know that like there's some like chance stuff, but like him going into the same church
at the same time,
it's like, what are the? Come on now, that's like way too.
And apparently, symbiotes give you greasy Bieber hair, and they make you wave finger guns with eyeliner, and then you walk around like a womanizing douchebag.
I like how like he's like, oh, like.
But where'd the eyeliner come from? Why does he all of a sudden? Because there was one where he's like messing with his hair. He's got his hair down. So I'm gonna go with symbiote Brett while I'm doing this right now.
Yeah, I like how now he's attractive. Like now the women are like paying attention to him.
But like he also has eyeliner.
I don't know.
So that's, I don't know either.
That's awful.
So that was a very odd choice, because I could deal with the hair, like maybe because there's this one part where he runs up the stairs and like he has the hair done differently, so he like just chooses not to. But why does he all? I'm gonna.
I mean, I guess it was kind of on brand. I know it was super in at that time, but yeah.
It just felt so awkward. Like, I think the biggest thorn and the cluster of thorns on this movie is there were so many good ideas that were just abandoned in this movie. Where, obviously, this is the Sam Raimi connection. It reminded me of Doctor Strange and Multiverse of Madness. Like, it just felt like a comic book movie with handcuffs. And I know that this movie had a lot of Sam Raimi, and then the studio was like, let's do this, similar to Multiverse of Madness, where it's like, hey, Sam Raimi's movie is much more of a horror film. Like, wait, no, we just had this movie, we need it to be like this. You know, the studio was really concerned that Thor Love and Thunder was a dark movie, so they made it funny. And then they're like, wait, this movie's kind of too scary, so let's bring it back to the middle. And Spider-Man 2 is a reminder, even today, let Sam Raimi cook. If we just get a movie that is Spider-Man, Sandman, and then this delivery of the Harry Osborn arc, I'm much more pleased with this movie. But we didn't get that.
Well, and he showed in 2 that he can deliver on his story threads.
Yep.
I think the biggest job of the studio is to have people to rein the director in and keep his focus on the story. Because we've seen where you give the directors too much with like Thor Love and Thunder, where it's like Tiki's the only person there and nobody's there to like rein in a couple of his jokes to like kind of focus the movie a little bit better. And you've seen it with like Snyder a ton of times where it's like you either give us like you're being too controlling, or like you let him do too much, and it's like, why is this movie now like 4 hours? Like, we got to get somewhere in the happy middle.
This movie is so awkward at parts where the characters are so unaware of what's going on at sometimes, where it feels like plot armor of like, let's just make sure that no one knows what's actually happening. The audience has all the dramatic irony, and it's just too convenient that everything's happening. And I hated that all of a sudden Kirsten Dunst is a singer. Let's have a sequence with her singing on Broadway. Let's have her singing in a jazz club like 5 times. I don't care. Why is there so much fake singing? Because it's obviously lip singing. It's not good lip singing either. So all the level of detail that was cared for in Spider-Man 2 is now out the window. And then at the end, it just stops. Like, there wasn't a conclusion. They're just dancing, and then it fades to black. It didn't feel like the story was over. I'll never love again. It is, I'll never love a movie again because I was just so happy that it was over. Like, I was so disappointed that Spider-Man 2 ended. This one, I was like, okay, good. Let's get on. I was ready for the Amazing Spider-Man. I was like, please,
time to move on.
This is why they rebooted it.
Yeah, I mean, it's, and you talked about this last week. Go check out 2 weeks ago. Go check out our Back to the Future episode. But this movie, when they're doing it, Sam Raimi had a lot more control in the first one, and then he probably lost some of that control, but was able to keep it very focused in the second. By the time after the second one, this movie was the biggest movie in the world for a while, Spider-Man 2. The studio, producers, everybody's got their story they want to tell. And it's clear here that, like, so many voices, there were so many chefs in the kitchen that the movie's all over the place, and those story threads are just, like, completely abandoned.
And what's so unfortunate is the Harry Osborn story arc. We very rarely in movies over the course of a trilogy get characters that are different in each movie. Harry's arc is fantastic. From the very first time that we meet him in the first Spider-Man, we are on a path towards who he's going to be. And because the studio just wanted to have Topher Grace and Venom in this movie, we don't get to spend as much time because there's some really amazing Harry moments, and it pays off. But it really feels like a negative sum because of all the wasted bits in this movie. So I just feel like what Peter said to Sandman at the end of this movie, I look at this movie, and despite all of its shortcomings, its bad choices, its poorly timed Tobey Maguire hip thrusts, and I just say, I forgive you. And I hope that it'll just turn into a sandstorm and blow away because it's just bad.
Like dust in the wind.
And kind of like Tobey Maguire's cry face. Just go away. Just go away. So let me hear your roses for The Amazing Spider-Man.
The Amazing Spider-Man. So
new Spider-Man, new actors, new cast, reboot.
New everything.
Reset.
Visually, the choices they made, from costume to webs to the sound effects they use, to the lighting, this movie is so much fun.
Yes.
Like, it is amazing. It is breathtaking. It really highlights, like, this visually is what, like, a superhero movie can do and, like, blow you away.
Yep. 100%. All the marketing material pre The Amazing Spider-Man coming out was "It will amaze." I remember seeing it. Used to go to the Bob Bullock IMAX in Austin, right off of MLK. I lived just down the street, and any movie that I could see in IMAX, I would see it. But I would never see it in 3D because I didn't want to wear the glasses. The technology wasn't there. And this movie was the first movie that really made me think, wow, this is the future. And it was designed for that. It looks incredible. Some of the first-person shots, we'd never seen that before. The way that Spider-Man's suit looked, I think this might be one of, if not like top 3 Spider-Man suits. The way that it looks, the visual style, the appeal, and then just the way that Andrew Garfield like brought some of the animated character to Spider-Man's feel. I just loved the way it looked and felt. There's definitely some shortcomings and flaws, but like I had a buddy, my roommate, when we walked out of the movie theater, out of the Bob Bullock IMAX, he says like, it was okay. And I said, it was okay, but it was amazing. It amazed me. The cinematography, the colors, the choices, the action, it delivers on the promise. Will it amaze you? It does just that. Even today, by Marvel standards, I still think it stands up and is a very entertaining movie.
Yes, it is super entertaining. And it hits on like a perfect summer blockbuster-esque watch.
Is it super emotional or heavy? Does it deliver on a lot of emotional arcs? Not as much as other comic book or themed movies, but it's really fun.
Yeah.
It is fun.
And that leads to my second, which is the humor in the suit is so much fun. All of us that grew up with Spider-Man remember the little quips that he would tell people in, video games or in the TV shows or other things. And that was always one of the biggest knocks on Tobey's Spider-Man was he's good as Peter Parker, but just as Spider-Man, it's just kind of, when he's in the suit, sometimes it's a little bland. And I think from the jump, Garfield's personality, when he puts the mask on, shines.
See, and so I know people will comment on this about my rows. I really liked Andrew Garfield as both Peter and Spider-Man. I just liked that he had personality. In my opinion, the way that Tobey Maguire plays Peter Parker, both as Spider-Man and Peter, like, he was 27 years old when he was supposed to be playing a high school student. He didn't look like a high school student. And he was always very vanilla, like very even-keeled. Like, sometimes his acting chops, when he would get mad, it seemed very, and when he gets sad, it felt like I was watching somebody that didn't know how to act. Like, he looks like Peter Parker, visually. But emotionally and maturity-wise, it didn't always feel real. Whereas there's a lot of people that didn't like Andrew Garfield's take on being more emotional, but I liked that there was levels. And there's a lot of people, I recognize I'm in the minority.
My thing is, and some of it's not. I don't like the voice that he uses because he doesn't speak American natively. He's British. But
he's one of them tea sippers.
But the way that he, like, his tone sometimes bugged me. But I also think it's harder for so many people relate to, like, Spider-Man being, like, already a nerd. Limited friends, limited other things. This Spider-Man's cool. Like, he can skateboard, so clearly he could fit in if he wanted to. Like, he's chosen to be a loner with his character, and I appreciate they're doing something a little differently. But to me, it was, I think, that shell shock.
Maybe I had a roommate at the time who he lost his mother at a very young age, and he talked about losing his mother when he was 7 years old. How that really did put a lot of trauma on him and forced him to think differently. He's a strong dude. He's on the wrestling team. He was a drummer in a band. Like, he's a cool dude. And one of my best friends in life. Shout out Brandon. I love you, dude. But he also admitted, like, he was really socially awkward, very quiet. He needed people to bring him out of his shell. And so without friends, kind of just a standoffish office person. So I totally understand it's a very valid criticism that, hey, he could do these things before. He's a smart guy. He's got humor, but also the trauma kind of represses some of that. And so one of the roses that it's a rose petal that dies quickly. Is like, I liked that they tried to do something different with the Richard Parker storyline and Peter's parents. We didn't get that much, not much in the comic books in general. We tend to rely a lot on Uncle Ben and Aunt May as the, with great power comes great responsibility. That is like the origin. So rehashing a lot of that is a weakness of the film, but I liked that they tried to do something different. It just is kind of ebbs and flows where anytime you're doing something different, some people are going to just compare it to the original. And so whether you like Uncle Ben or Aunt May is totally a personal choice. Whether you like the way that Peter Parker was portrayed is a personal choice. I did like that they tried to do something different. The execution might have been a little bit better in certain areas.
My second thorn is Aunt May casting. I think of all the Aunt Mays we've seen, this is by far the worst one.
Yeah, I did not like Sally Field's Aunt May.
She's just so whiny.
She's too whiny, but also she's so recognizable. Pick somebody else. Like, I think Martin Sheen, on the other hand, he's a really good Uncle Ben. I liked the way that he spoke to him. He's a little bit younger than the Uncle Ben of Spider-Man and Sam Raimi Spider-Man, but he feels very working class. I like the way that he spoke to him.
He does shift work, so it's like, okay, I see why.
And I even like the way that they wrote, like the words, the way that he speaks to him, the way that he gets in his face. He feels like a dad.
Yeah, I like that he calls him son. He's like
Uncle Ben in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man feels like your grandpa. Like, hey, I'll do whatever I can to help you. Uncle Ben in this feels like, I'm your dad. I will get in, like, look here, kid, you're gonna listen to me. there's this sense of honor and respect, whereas the other one is a little bit more like, let me help you, you feeble old man, Uncle Ben, I'll help you.
You're like, why'd you make your old uncle paint the kitchen by himself, you jerk?
Yeah,
you should have came home.
And like when they're talking about like, hey, fixing the AC or the refrigerator in the downstairs, that seems like something like your dad, like, hey, I need you to help me do this, so you do this right now, and I'll do this. You hold the flashlight, buddy.
Yeah.
That felt right. Aunt May, however, I didn't feel that connection. So losing Uncle Ben felt hard because you feel that relationship, but throughout the rest of the Amazing Spider-Man, I never really felt that close to this Aunt May, just because she always looked like she was strung out emotionally.
I thought you were going to say on drugs. She was always strung out. I was like, oh my gosh.
No, but like...
Some new revelations here in the Minivan Movie Club.
No, I'm not saying
Sally
that.
Fields was on drugs.
She just looks sad the whole time and always wants to talk to him, and the angst is like they're both going through the trauma, whereas Aunt May in Spider-Man was able to help Peter go through it. This time she's just not emotionally available.
So it's almost like you're saying like Spider-Man kept forgetting those eggs on purpose, so he had a reason to leave the house every time he came home. He's like, oh, didn't get those eggs. Let me get out of here again.
Shoot.
Aunt May's going crazy.
Yeah, I'd say a shortcoming for me in this movie, a thorn, was I like the Lizard as a character. My favorite villain from the animated series. I really enjoyed it. And I like Kirk Connors in this movie. I think it works. But just the like derivative beats over and over and over again. We get to see Peter Parker as a teenager in his senior year, and he falls in love with a girl. His uncle dies, and now he has to fight a villain who's also green, who became green because he works at Oscorp and injected himself with a green serum, and he has these internal dialogues with himself. Like, it's just so much that William Dafoe was so good in the first Spider-Man, and you just cripple Kirk Connors' ability to be a really good villain, and he's fine. When I ranked my villains list, I was like, oh, he just kind of falls here.
Yeah.
So I think it's not a bad interpretation. It's just there's so many Spider-Man villains you could have chosen from to start off this reboot. Why go with a green guy who's also a scientist, who's also dealing with this internal dialogue in the same way that William Dafoe's Norman Osborn did? It just seems like a weird choice when you could have gone with a Scorpion. You could have gone with Rhino. There's so many good Spider-Man villains that aren't Green Goblin. Why? And even like the Lizard, he doesn't have to be done this way. The choices that they did with the writing and directing, they pushed it towards like a William Dafoe Green Goblin, and it didn't need to be that way.
All right. Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Amazing Spider-Man 2. My rose for both 2 and 1, they get a lot of flack for being bad movies. Like, Andrew Garfield sucks. This sucks. Skateboarding sucks. Peter Parker sucks. The Amazing Spider-Man sucks. I think they're fun movies.
Yeah, I
fun.
got to give that rose to The Amazing Spider-Man because
they are fun.
It is such a fun movie that I did not give it enough credit for when I watched it in theaters the first time. After rewatching it, this is the first time I've seen it since I saw it in theaters originally. That is a super fun movie. That is one that's like on the list of I can't wait till Gibson's old enough for me to watch that with him because I know that we are going to just be like, oh, did you see that? And just like enjoying it.
It really does amaze you. And in the second one, they play a lot with the camera angles and even more like fun goofiness where he's talking to people. Just all that. It feels like I'm watching Spider-Man. So I really enjoyed that. And I also really liked a rose for Electrode as a villain. I know that he doesn't look like he looks in the animated series or any of the comics, but I like that they took a different approach. I like seeing Jamie Foxx as that villain. I'll still never believe that Jamie Foxx is not cool. Jamie Foxx is handsome. Even as a straight white male, I can say that. He's a handsome man. He has got symmetrical face. He got great teeth. They tried to give him a gap and a comb over, but like he's still jacked and built. There's no way some woman is walking by him on a street and being like, oh, he's not handsome. Yeah. Like, nah, I can see behind that. We can give him a haircut and some contacts.
Get some
and
braces,
that's husband material.
Yep.
That is husband material. So I didn't like that. But his villain as Max, I wish they would have just played more with this. He loves Spider-Man. He doesn't know how to control his powers, and he was strong. Like, seeing the way he destroyed his web blasters and all that, it was a really compelling villain. And the moment he gets going, you're like, oh, this is a real threat. We gotta solve this problem.
Yeah, my first rose for this movie is the ambition that they had with that villain, the music, the score, where it's like, they hate you, and like the way that it like reverberates through the speakers of like his internal voice, but the way that they also use like the harshness of the instruments. And then visually, when he's using that electricity and it like explodes, they just deliver on. It's just such a fun and unique fight scene because it kind of stands out in memory. So that's my rose for that one.
My second rose for this movie, and things are going to start getting sloppy after this, is I really loved the way that they captured the relationship between Peter and Gwen. It felt very much like a high school love. And I know that they're kind of leaving. This movie starts with them graduating and going into this young adult. I really struggled with Peter Parker as like Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst, just because it felt so forced. Like the narrative of the story forced them together, not the charisma. Whereas like Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield, they kind of work together. Yeah. Like, it makes sense that these people would be so focused on school, and then all of a sudden they notice each other, and then they very quickly become infatuated with each other. Personal story for me, I remember I had a high school girlfriend, and she wrote me a note one time, and it was like a super cool love letter, and at the end it said, "I don't just like you, Brett Gray. I am infatuated with you." And I remember feeling so like, oh my gosh, this girl like is crazy about me. Like, I'm crazy about her. The way that they talk, the way that they look, the way that they act, it feels like people that are crazy about each other.
Yeah.
And that felt real because of the promise that he had to make, Peter had to make with her dad, and he's like feels torn between like, should I be with you, should I not? And the dialogue from Gwen when she says, "Because you can't lose me, we can't be together." Who does that work out for? Like, that felt authentic. Whereas in the first Spider-Man series, the relationship between MJ and Tobey feels just kind of like, well, we have to have it for the story. It doesn't make sense. This actually felt real, and so I liked that the stakes were real.
Yeah, that's my second one.
Perfect.
Is the struggle with like delivering on his promise to Captain Stacy, realizing the danger that Gwen's in when she knows who he is, and trying to help him, but also when you're apart, like the pain that you feel and like both of you are feeling. I think that's the central thread that holds the movie together for the most part.
Well, there's a part towards the end where he says to her, swoops her up on the bridge, "You're my path. I choose you. I'll follow you wherever you go. There's crime in London. We'll go do that.
Find Jack the Ripper.
We all got to make a choice." And I thought that was like a really interesting foreshadow. Like, we all have to make a choice of him going through his darkness. It's just kind of an interesting thing. I really enjoyed some of the writing there.
So leading into those thorns, the big one, I think everybody's big one, has got to be Green Goblin.
Gosh.
Just visually, the choice.
Well, the actor is terrible.
The casting.
That guy sucks.
He's just not good. The second that he gets on the screen,
it's like they said, "Hey, can we get a bad version of the Tobey Maguire from Spider-Man 3? And let's make that guy. Let's make him the new Green Goblin."
It's like if this movie was a plane, it's like, oh, this is pretty good. We're going.
But like the scene when he's like talking to Spider-Man, like, "Hey, you said you can go." Like the way, "Hey, so you talked to Peter? Okay, cool. So can I have your blood?" And then he's like after he jumps out the window, Harry jumps on the couch. And just, he's like, he wouldn't give me his blood. He wouldn't give me his blood. He's terrible. It's so bad. When he's in the elevator with Gwen, "Hey, Gwen, so I heard y'all broke up." Yeah. Like, always squinting his eyes. It's bad. Everything he says is unbelievable. I don't believe anything is real. And then when you see him as the Green Goblin,
his nose gets longer.
It looks like if Master Chief from Halo somehow became a homeless person in San Francisco and is cosplaying as Gollum. Like, it's just He shows up and you're like, what the?
Yeah, that was. I don't know
who approved this. Who greenlighted this at Columbia? Sony, we have to have a conversation because you have now set up a Sinister Six movie I have no interest in seeing.
Yeah,
I'm out.
They nosedive that thing hard. And do you have another one?
I thought that Electrode was a strong villain, but when he starts playing the Itsy Bitsy Spider, I was like, come on, y'all, we can be cheeseball, but you can't do this in these moments. You know, Marvel has struggled recently with Thor: Love and Thunder, like being funny at the wrong time, trying to be cheap. I was like, he's like, oh, I love that song, so good. I'm like, bro, stop. There are some truly special and amazing sequences in this movie, but the cheese ball thing really just pull it down. But all in all, I was surprised in looking back, like how much I really liked these movies.
Yeah, the last thing, and it's something you kind of spoke about on the first movie, was my last thorn, and one of the bigger thorns is like they just completely failed to deliver on his father past storyline.
We talked about that.
Like this National Treasure style thing where it's like
it's cool.
Some things pan out, some things don't, and then there's just like some questions. It's just I don't know if they really plan to just reveal more in a third movie, and it just didn't.
It just felt like the whole Richard Parker story, which was a really great addition. That should have all been in the first movie because they introduced it at the start of the film, and then it never shows up really other than the bag, and then here we get a lot of it, and it delivers like. The fact that Richard Parker made it in his DNA, so that makes sense why it's special to Peter. That's a huge payoff and a new revelation to who Spider-Man is as a character that we didn't get elsewhere. So I thought that was just a misfire.
So we're on to the next.
On to the next one.
Multiverse.
Another reboot. A
reboot of a reboot.
Another universe of Spider-Man, and we are coming back home for a homecoming. Yeah. What were your roses and thorns for Tom Holland's Spider-Man in Homecoming?
So Homecoming, I think out of all the casting, he is definitely the most believable as a high school student. I think that he portrays that emotion and that like awkward, like he feels awkward. Like you're like, oh, Tom Holland's probably like a funny guy.
He feels awkward, but he also feels like a high school student. He also feels smart.
Yeah, like all the characteristic. He kind of you can. It's believable.
The things that I liked, that I understood and accepted about Andrew Garfield being like an outcast. This guy's outcast for the reasons people wanted, so they're able to autocorrect the things that they didn't get right with Tobey and Andrew. They nailed with Tom.
What about you?
So props to this. I second everything you just said about him being like the perfect Spider-Man. I think that this is a great version of a good villain. It both ties into the original Avengers with Chitauri and the Battle of New York, but you have Michael Keaton playing the villain. To that cool moment of his wings up at the moon, kind of giving a bat signal, tie into Batman. But then like the twist of him being Liz's dad, like you did not see that coming.
Oh, no.
It is a great villain.
Comes to the door,
Makes sense. Like it's good. If you can't have a good comic book movie without a good villain, and it's a new villain to the Spider-Man that we haven't seen yet. We've seen so many versions across Sam Raimi's trilogy and the Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2. So to have a new villain that we haven't seen before is refreshing. It's done. It makes sense. It's done really well, and it feels like a localized New York story. So got to give credit to that.
And you completely understand his motivations.
Yep.
Is like just a blue-collar worker, trying to provide for his guys, trying to make a way. And he just kind of gets caught up in the snowball.
If I was like pitching a Spider-Man movie, my rose, like I would pitch this movie.
Yeah,
it's got a high school dance. It's got all the stuff going on. Like, hey, we got to go do these things. We got to go to DC for the debate team competition. Like that feels like high school. It works. So I just loved it.
I like too. I think the second biggest thing that works for this movie is that they don't try to give you a complete origin story.
Yep.
We don't have Uncle Ben scene. We don't have XYZ scene. He is learning to use the Tony Stark suit, but we're not learning like I'm stuck on the roof. What do I do? And then like you have that whole exposition that we've seen already several times. Like we don't need it, and they were very aware that we did not need to see that again. And I I still appreciate it, especially after watching all those Spider-Man movies back to back, not having to go back to that storyline again.
I really didn't have a whole lot of thorns for this movie. I just enjoyed it.
I think that
it
maybe a little bit silly at times.
It knew what it wanted to be. Like, let's just have a Spider-Man movie. We're not going to rehash these points that we know. I enjoyed that. They just said, let's just have a movie with Spider-Man solving this mystery, figuring out this crime, solving the problems, and becoming a superhero.
Yep.
So I enjoyed that. What did you think about Spider-Man 2 Far From Home?
So I remember having this feeling right after watching it because it came out right after Endgame, and then the whole world's grieving still for Tony Stark, and I just felt
remember us talking about the trailer before, because we knew after Infinity War, like, oh, Spider-Man got dusted, but there's a movie coming out like 6 weeks after Endgame.
Yeah.
So I guess he's coming back.
Coming back for another one. Well, everybody had that feeling too, because it's like Wakanda had just come out, and everybody was like going crazy, and it just broke all these records. Everybody's like, "There's no way they're getting rid of that money, that cash cow. All they have to do is make a sequel." So, so I thought that the showing the grieving and the homage they pay to Tony Stark's character, the reverence they kind of give what he represented to this Peter, and how important that father figure he was, and the everywhere I go he's there, that type of thing. I thought that they portrayed that perfectly.
So I'm gonna give credit again to Mysterio as a villain. Great choice and a new villain that we haven't seen before. I really like Jake Gyllenhaal in the role. Another twist of, oh, he's a good guy. No, he is the bad guy. And I did not know much about Mysterio to begin with at all, so I was genuinely surprised in the movie theaters of how that twist came about. I believe, multiverse. We're getting Spider-Verse. That's going to be cool. So the movie version of that was really, really good. I liked that a lot.
Yeah, that's my second one, is echoing your sentiment. I thought that the casting for Mysterio was perfect because he has enough gravitas that he could feel could this guy be the guy that steps in and kind of
they're going to change something. They're going to retcon and they're going to write him as a hero, not a villain.
They even in their marketing, because they were sometimes he's an anti-hero, because that was my first thing when I saw a trailer, is everybody knows Mysterio's a bad guy. When are you gonna make him the villain? But they did a good job of trying to get out ahead of that and being oh no, we know that he's been one in the past, but we're doing something different. And so you still get to have that fun. Oh, he's a villain.
Yep. Now it was good seeing Samuel Jackson in this. Lots of other characters. Happy, Ant-Man. This just feels like a Spider-Man movie, and I like how it feels like a Spider-Man movie. It's fun, and then when it gets to the climax, the intensity really ratchets up, and you feel like this is a much bigger threat than Spider-Man or other Spider-Mans in the past have ever had to deal with. Yeah. So it does a good job of being a Spider-Man, but also raising the stakes, because now Spider-Man has to do this on his own. The visual effects in this movie are just insane. It's set the bar. I remember watching oh my gosh, the skeleton Iron Man and all the sequences getting hit by the train. It is truly a feat of how can we push the bar? That was something that had never been done in a Spider-Man movie before. So if you look back, this is where things really changed, and I really liked that. What were your thorns?
So, and this is something that really gets I feel rectified in the next movie, but MJ is so stiff to me. The way she's portrayed as a character, I'm why is he even who cares? I don't get her off the screen. Why are we giving her more screen time? I'm just not interested. And I'm not an MJ hater in general. I know I was talking bad about Kirsten Dunst's MJ. It's just I do like Zendaya's portrayal in the third one, but in this one I just think it's I have no investment in her.
See, I was actually okay with Zendaya. The thorn for me, I really didn't like Happy in this movie.
Okay.
I think Happy was great in the Iron Man movies and the way he's used there, and I think in the first Iron Man they use him, or in the first Spider-Man they use him enough to where it feels I'm getting connective tissue to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But it feels a little campy. But this one, it is too campy. It's too much humor, too much goofiness, and and now he's dating Aunt May. It's a funny bit, but when he's saving the kids in the tomb in London, he's like, "Give me the spear." Like, this is a guy that has been along the ride for Iron Man. He's the head of security for Stark Industries.
The forehead of security.
The forehead. Sorry, he is gonna be a little more capable than this. Like, just to make him the foil of the joke is kind of a too much. And obviously, you've got to have those characters. It just makes it too much campy for me. And I like Jon Favreau. I'm not a Disney lover, but I like him and is happy, and it just feels too off, and it brings too much silliness at times. When, like, I'm cool with just Tom Holland, Ned, and MJ bringing some of the awkwardness on a European trip. That's high school. It's awkward. It's silly. Flash can be silly. Being awkward and wanting to find love, that's silly. I don't need happy, and that was just a thorn for me.
That was my main
okay.
two.
So let's bring it to No Way Home. Spider-Man 3.
No Way Home. The big flower in the room has got to be the closure for our. Not only did they do a closure of their home trilogy, but they're also able to do a good closure that we didn't get from the other two's series. And so the way that they were able to do that for 3 different Spider-Men, and not just like, oh, we're going to sacrifice Tobey here or do this, but that felt like respectful to the characters and the directors and all those things. It's a hats off to Marvel for No Way Home.
Chris McKenna is the writer of No Way Home, and that is the biggest rose I can give probably today, is that when you think of movies like Avengers or Avengers Endgame, those movies were written with the movies beforehand with the intention of, like, all right, we're going to write these 4 movies, Iron Man, Hulk, Thor, Captain America, to get to Avengers. We're going to write all these other movies with the intentions of getting to Thanos and Infinity War and Endgame. That was the Endgame.
Yeah.
This movie is that kind of epic level, only you had different people writing those movies. You weren't planning to get there, and somehow you're able to craft everything. And you have a villain from every single Spider-Man movie before this in that, with the exception of Vulture and Mysterio. But from every other series, there's a villain from those movies. And it touches, it slaps, it is so good. There are so many good lines, so many good things. And in a way, this is Peter's origin story. This is him getting... I thought it was really interesting on my rewatch, watching before they all the chaos ensues. They're applying to colleges, and they all say it's a fresh start. It's a fresh start. It's gonna be a fresh start. Look, as long as we're together, it doesn't matter. It's gonna be a fresh start. And at the end of this movie, it's a fresh start.
Fresh start. A forced upon fresh start.
Yeah.
Yep,
so I thought that was really interesting, and I love the writing. The writing was fantastic. There's so many lines in this movie that just hit me. Before anything happens that gets really, really bad with the multiverse splitting, MJ says to Peter after they find out they didn't get into MIT, she goes, "It's okay. I wouldn't change a thing." And that's when he realized at the end of the movie, hey, I can't change anything. She wouldn't have changed a thing, so I can't change a thing. The writing is phenomenal. It's one of the best Marvel movies ever written, I think. Each character is written really well. Even some of the silly stuff is great. I really, really love this movie.
Yeah, I think that if you want to look for what Spider-Man represents as a whole, as a character, this movie perfectly portrays that to a T. With great power comes great responsibility. This movie shows you and tells you what Spider-Man's all about, and you get to see it on a scale. Because for me, like you said earlier, I was a Batman kid. The thing that always annoyed me about Spider-Man is something that I think is perfectly represented here, which is he wouldn't let those characters go die.
No. He
would not let that happen. And so when I first watched the movie, even though I walked away blown away, I was like, why? Like, why are you trying to save them? That doesn't make any sense. Like, you're going to hurt other people. Everybody that dies when they're there is your responsibility. But even, like, when Aunt May tells them, you did the right thing. Like, even though I get hurt here, it doesn't mean we made a bad choice. Like, that's not evidence of you making a bad decision.
Yeah. Now, this movie, a big rose for me, this is a personal story. So, when this movie came out, was a very kind of unique time in my life. My grandfather had just passed away. It was the first time I'd ever really dealt with loss of anyone of any significance. He did not raise me by any means, but a metaphorical Uncle Ben. I was very, very close to him. I just loved him a lot. And it was not as sudden or tragic as Aunt May was in this movie, but it wasn't expected. I mean, he's older in his life, and so I'm not shocked that he passed away. He lived a full life, but it happened very quickly. We got a phone call, and the next day it was over. And so this is the first movie that I watched after he had passed away. And I didn't go to the theater thinking like, oh, I'm going to watch a movie about this and it's going to remind me. But like when Aunt May passes away, I remember being at home with my grandfather as he expired and like holding his hand, looking at him around. We were with our family all watching him as his life came to an end. And so I remember the emotion when Tom Holland is looking at Aunt May as she expires. I remember feeling those same feelings. Like that put a lump in my throat where I was like, okay, I'm not ready to watch this movie anymore. This is too real. And then I remember after my grandfather had passed away, and I think I handled it as positive as you can. You know, it's now several years removed, but I remember having a conversation with my friend Martin Green, listener of the show. I've given a lot of shout-outs today to people that listen to the show.
Shout out.
But I was talking with Martin about, like, he was asking me, hey, how are you doing? I'm just checking on you as a buddy. And I said, it's kind of like having a weird existential crisis where, like, I know that my grandfather believed in me. And, like, now that he's gone, like, does that belief in me, like, disappear? And, like, I didn't really have the words to put to it, but I just kind of told him that. And the next day, you and I go see No Way Home. And at the very end of the movie, Tom Holland and Happy are talking at the grave. And Happy says exactly what I felt. And I just I got really teary-eyed listening because he's like, you know, when you lose them, it's like you lose them twice. First, they're gone. And then you remember all the things they stood for. And you think that those things are gonna disappear too, and that would just put words to what I was feeling. Like, wow, is my belief in myself gonna disappear? Yeah. Is the love that I had for my grandfather gonna disappear? Where, like in the movie, Peter's talking to, like, I can still hear her voice. I can hear her voice. Like I can still hear my grandfather's voice. And this movie just like hit me a lot. And like even in the rewatch, I was back in that moment all again. I could feel it all over again. So for me, it's a reminder that no, it's not. It's not gone. The love is real. And what Happy and Peter talk about at the very end of the movie, like, no, it keeps going. All the way back to Aunt May and Spider-Man 2, you know, she says that you need people like Spider-Man to give you hope. And like for me, I'm not Peter Parker. I'm not a superhero. Losing my grandfather to complications of old age is not a challenge that other people don't have to deal with. But Spider-Man kind of gave me hope when I needed it to know, like, hey, it's okay. I am gonna struggle with this, but it's not gonna like defeat me, and I can cope with this loss. You know, seeing other Spider-Men talk to Spider-Man about losing their person, like learning to forgive, learning to cope. It's like a phenomenal movie. Like I said in the last couple episodes when we talked about Guardians of the Galaxy, it's a top 3 Marvel movie for me. So there's no doubt to me that this is my favorite Spider-Man movie.
Yeah, it ranks right there for me as well. Little
the
preview of our ranking.
Thorns for me is that it just happened to come at a sad time in my life, but that's also one of the reasons why it's got such a
how dare you have a sad time in your life right around the release of a Spider-Man movie.
Sure. Yeah, that was a special. Let's get to the movie that we're talking about, really.
So real quick, I have one thorn. I love this movie. It is in my top 5. It's just a little nitpicky thing. It's just kind of silly that Strange is doing this spell for a high school kid to forget about everybody across the whole multiverse.
Yeah.
It's just a little silly plot device. It doesn't break the movie for me in any way. I just always thought that was kind of a silly
I always
thing.
wonder, why didn't he just say, like, hey, can we just make people forget about the video? That makes them Peter Parker.
It's like, that's a little like, but if you execute a movie well, even if you have something that's as silly as that is, the audience will forgive you and overlook those problems.
Having Charlie Cox and Benedict Cumberbatch, those like execute on the Marvel formula of having connective tissue and cameos here and there. So the way they did it all with Andrew Garfield, payoff, Tobey Maguire, there's a whole video on this movie.
This movie and the next one we'll talk about are the two like perfect examples of what a multiversal movie should be utilized as and what it could be for comic book movies.
Yep. So let's talk about Into the Spiderverse. What were your roses for that movie?
So first off, what I loved about the home trilogy was that they don't put you through that same origin story again. What I love about this is they give you some fresh takes on the origin story that make it feel fresh, even though you're watching him kind of struggle the same way you watch Tobey and the same way you watch Andrew's Spider-Man struggle. But they do it in such a way that is like, it's fun to watch. Visually, it's very fun.
Well, it was a totally new style of animation,
and the
totally fun.
The dynamic is fun, but you're getting that development. A lot of things are afraid to show us these new characters struggle in so many ways, but it pays off so much at the end of the movie when he's successful because we got to see him grow.
Yep.
And so that's something that I think that this movie does so well.
I think that the multiverse, and we've now seen that even after having several multiversal movies in the MCU, it's a tough concept to do and to deliver well. This is a little bit ahead of the curve, and it does it well.
Yeah.
My name's Peter Parker. It's such a funny
I'm the
gag.
only Spider-Man.
But it works, and it's hilarious. Seeing the different visual styles, Everything Everywhere All at Once tried to play with this a little bit, and this is an animated movie, but this hits. It delivers well. It won Oscars, so it's a great movie.
Yeah, I think it showed everybody just like what animation as a medium is capable of, and I think it opened the door for a lot of people. I know anime's gotten big in the last several years. In America, it's always been big overseas, just to show like, hey, there are other really great storylines that can be told through this medium. And so, yeah, that was awesome. And then I love his family dynamics, his relationship with his dad. I feel like hits in so many ways. I think so many of us who've had the dad around is like, sometimes it's like, why are you so tough? Why are they so tough on me? Like, why are they forcing me to, like, my dad always had that, you don't have to do something, but if you sign up, you're going to finish it. Like, you got to complete it. And like that sort of like, and there were so many times in my life when I'm growing up and I'm like, I don't want to finish being in band for this year. Like, my friends aren't in band. I want to do something else. But looking back on it now as an adult, you appreciate that, like, yeah, like I got a lot of things out of that, even though I don't play the saxophone anymore. Like, I still learned a lot about like practicing and like what it takes to compete and like all these different things that are life lessons that I would have never had I just allowed myself to just like do whatever I wanted to do as a kid. And I appreciate that we get to see that with Miles, and we get to see him go from like being kind of resentful to at the end hugging his dad. Like I think one of the funniest lines in the scenes is when he goes on the bullhorn and tells him like, I love you. And he's like trying to get him to tell him back, because it's just such a perfect example of like my mom, when I was in high school, we'd finished football practice. She's picking us up in the 10th grade. We opened the door. We had a Suburban. We opened the door to the Suburban, and she is blaring the theme song to Dawson's Creek. Okay. I don't want to wait. And like all the rest of the team is standing like right there. And me and my brother are just like mortified, like over there. And so like that awkwardness that he feels when his dad's over there, I love you, son. And like for the next like 2 weeks, every time me and my brother walk in the room, I don't want to wait.
Gosh.
So it's just like it's fun.
Yeah,
to get that awkwardness.
It did for an animated movie. It still feels very real. Like
yeah.
And I remember that when I first started it was gonna be animated, I was like, I'm not really interested in that. But then everyone's like, dude, you got to see it. You got to see it. And for many people, it's their favorite Spider-Man movie.
I watched a lot of videos this week.
All of the movies, it's the best one. Rotten Tomatoes has it rated the highest of all Spider-Man movies.
It came out the same year as Infinity War and some other really big movie, and people people I was listening to say like this is the best superhero movie that came out that year, which to me is crazy because Infinity War is on the top of my list of movies. But
it's a good one though, and there's a reason why there's a much expected sequel. I think the only thorn that I had is that I wanted to see a little bit more from some of the other villains. That you get so many of the different Spider-Man, Spider-Ham, Jenny Parker, Penny Parker, all these. I would have loved to have seen more explored from like Scorpion and Tombstone. We got Prowler here, but like Scorpion's a huge Spider-Man villain, and for him to just be like an extra at Aunt May's house is a little bit silly. But that's a very small thorn.
Oh yeah,
it's very forgivable. I'm so excited. I have stayed away from so much of the marketing materials for the second movie. All I know is that Part 2 has now been split into 2 parts. Or number 2 has been split into Part 1 and Part 2.
Part 1 and Part 2. Yeah.
So there's Across the Spider-Verse and then Beyond the Spider-Verse. But I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm super excited.
I guess we're going to talk about that movie next week because we're going to see it tomorrow. We're going to see it tomorrow. The question I have for you, though, is you've now seen every Spider-Man movie. What takeaways do you have? Were you surprised by something? Do you have any bigger picture of what Spider-Man represents?
So my 2 biggest movers after rewatching all of them have to be The Amazing Spider-Man and Into the Spiderverse. Both of those on a rewatch, they gave me so many things. I think they deliver so well on so many of the themes that Spider-Man represents. The ability to tell the story that they want to tell, and visually both of these movies are stunning.
Yep.
And so I think that those really moved very far up my boards as far as when we get to our final ranking. I think that something that helps Spider-Man to remain relevant and to be a character that always comes back is he's so relatable in so many ways to us individually. We knock on Thor because he's constantly finding himself, but the origin is always about him finding out who he is, and then that sequel is typically about him trying to overcome the difficulties of being in a dual life, of like living 2 separate lives and what that does to a person. And so I think that his struggles are something that we can all relate to, and that's why he's continued to be relevant for the last 75 years.
Yep. No, Spider-Man has been relevant for a long time. Rewatching these movies made me think, you know what? If they decide to do another reboot or more Spider-Man movies, I'm in. Because I like these characters. There's still so much untapped comic book lore. Sony has tried to do that with Morbius, and that was a great movie.
It's Morbin time.
And I still paid to see it opening weekend. Craven's coming out. I'll see that one. Like, whatever they want to do with Spider-Man, I'm on board. So let me hear it. What are your movie rankings?
So
we're gonna start from the bottom, or are you gonna go from?
Yeah, we can start from the bottom. So what is your last place in the Spider-Man pantheon?
My worst Spider-Man movie of all 9, Spider-Man 3.
Mine as well, Spider-Man 3. Yep.
8 is.
I thought you were saying you gave it an 8.
No, I gave it a 5. I gave it a 5.
I gave it a 4, but I was
gave it a 5.
I'm going to throw your laptop out this window right now.
8 is The Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Same.
I gave it a 7.5.
I gave it a 5.
Okay. That's too low.
I think that movie dies.
That is too low.
I think that it railroads itself too hard.
So 7, and here's where I know we're going to differ on this one. My 7, the original Spider-Man. Sam Raimi Spider-Man 1.
No.
I gave it a 7.5.
Oh, okay. Mine is Far From Home, but I gave it a 7.
Okay. 6 for me is The Amazing Spider-Man.
Okay.
I gave it a 7.5.
6 for me is Homecoming. I gave it a 7.5.
Okay. 5 for me, Far From Home.
Okay. What'd you give it?
8.5.
5 for me is The Amazing Spider-Man. I give it an 8.
4, Homecoming, 8.5.
4 for me is Spider-Man 1. I gave it a 9.
Okay. See, I think so. That's a big.
I think it's a perfect origin story.
I think it's just okay. I think it's looked bad. I think people look back with it with like rose-colored glasses.
Maybe I got
they've
the
got
green.
They've got big nostalgia for it, and It's just weak.
I
There's
don't think
parts
so.
of it that are weak. No, it's a fine movie. We talked about it. We gave the breakdown.
Yeah,
but
even though you're saying it, you still gave it a...
I said my biggest fall is like, Spider-Man 3 is a 5, and everything else is kind of within half a point of each other. I was just more surprised of how impressed I was with the Amazing Spider-Man movies. Of like, I always thought, those are garbage and crap. But then I watched them again. I'm like, no, they're really, really fun.
They're fun.
And that just pushed it a little bit above that movie. So 3 for me, and this I think people will disfer me. I put Into the Spiderverse at 3.
Me as well.
Oh wow,
I
really?
gave it a 9.5.
Okay, I gave it a 9.5. I figured you'd put it at 2 or 1.
No,
Okay.
no. I think it's awesome.
9.5 for me. Spider-Man 2, I gave it a 9.9 just because I can't give it a 10 because Kirsten Dunst is in it. But Spider-Man 2, I said it before.
Spider-Man 2 is 2.
If Iron Man was the prototype, Iron Man was the blueprint, this is the prototype for the MCU.
Yep. Spider-Man 2, I gave it a 10.
The No Way Home was a 1 for me. I gave it a 10. If I give it more, I give it more.
10.
Yeah.
Supermax.
So that I guess I think for me, one of the big takeaways I had as I kind of think about closing up this episode is like, one, do you want to see more Spider-Man stories? What Spider-Man stories do you want to hear? And I'm like, yep.
I'm in.
I'm
I
in,
think
like-
they showed you with Into the Spider-Verse that, like, even if we go back to the beginning, we can still do this really well if we keep it fresh and, new dynamics. So I'm 100% in.
Yeah, and I keep going back to this moment in The Amazing Spider-Man 2 at the very end of the movie where Paul Giamatti's awful take on Rhino shows up in a mechanized Rhino suit with like his face is CGI'd in it, so like his body looks tiny. Where the kid says, "I knew you'd come back." Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man had been gone for 5 months in a dark place. Who knows? Spider-Man always comes back.
Yep.
Whether it's another fight or another reboot, like Batman, he's always got another movie coming out.
Yep. He always stands back up.
And I think of the words that Gwen had in her speech. Hold on to hope. Be greater than what we suffer. Even in failure, be greater than what you suffer. And I think about so much of No Way Home and the stories I have with my grandfather. Spider-Man will always have a special place in my heart now because of those things. And I think the reason that we all can identify with him as a character, whether it's a video game on PlayStation or a comic book, or even my son watching Spidey and his amazing friends.
Yep.
We all know what it's like to hold on to hope. And we all want to be better than what we could be. Even in failure, we want to be able to be greater than what we suffer. We've all had family like Aunt May. Everyone's got someone in their family that they look up to, like Uncle Ben. And whether it's your father, whether it's your uncle, whoever it is, I hope that when you watch these movies that you can remember those people and love them fondly, because I think that's what Stan Lee did in creating these characters. I read a comment on YouTube. How happy do you think Stan Lee would have been watching No Way Home?
Oh.
Seeing these 3 versions of the characters that he loved. Him believing like Spider-Man was his greatest contribution. That just would have been really special.
Yeah, that's a shame, and it's important to remember that despite what some in the media might have you believe, I am Iron Man. No, that this is cinema.
Yeah,
like what Spider-Man represents, what he means to so many people, the emotions, the visuals, the storytelling capability. It doesn't matter what anybody, no matter how credentialed they are, says. What these movies are able to make us feel, it's cinema.
Yep.
That's what it's all about. This is why we love movies. This is why we do the Minivan Movie Club. This is why we go to the theater. It's not about does somebody have superpowers. It's about what does it make you feel? What does it represent? And what does it stand for? And everything that Spider-Man stands for is something that we all aspire to stand for.
So let us know what you think about Spider-Man. We're going to go see the new movie.
Yeah.
But I guess in the immortal words of Mary Jane Watson, go get him, Tiger, and we'll see you down the road.